of the ovum. Only one of them fuse with the surface membrane of the ovum. This we call the uniting of the sperm and the ovum. Actually, it's a fusion of the cell membranes, so that the genetic material then passes inside of the ovum. At this particular time, the destiny of the genetic program, the genetic destiny of this individual is established. We don't know what it is at this time, but we do know, of course, that as the chromosomes of the two come together, the genetic program is established at this time. Another biologic phenomenon which is consistent with the word al-gaid, and that is that as the individual, the female child, is born, she is born with all of the ova which she potentially will shed. So she will have several 100,000 ova. During her reproductive lifespan, of course, relatively few of these will be actually ovulated. So from amongst the many ova available, relatively few are then chosen to be ovulated. And if a spermatozoa is there, then at that particular time it could be fertilized. So therefore, when al-gaid is taken to mean a passing through, it will cover the period of the journey of the ovum as it takes from the oviduct and eventually through the uterus to the time of implantation. When it reaches implantation, it will pass into another stage of development, that is to the alaka stage. Thank you.
The Quran on Geology. Dr. Allison Pete Palmer. About our speaker, born and raised in New Jersey, AR, Pete Palmer earned his BS in geology from Pennsylvania State in 1946 and a PhD in geology from the University of Minnesota in 1950. During his lengthy career, he has held various positions in geology and paleontology, including Cambrian geologist, paleontologist, U.S. Geological Survey in Washington, D.C. from 1950 to 1966, Professor of Geology, State University of New York at Stony Brook from 1966 to 1980, and Centennial Science Program Coordinator, mega editor for about 40 volumes of multi-authored books on the geology of North America for the Geological Society of America in Boulder from 1980 to 1993. Since 1993, he has been recentered as president of the small non-profit Institute for Cambrian Studies. Dr. Allison Pete Palmer will now take you on an historic passage through time, using the now recently obtained knowledge from geological sciences, which he verifies so wondrously using chosen verses from the Quran and clearly stated comments of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him, known as Hadith.
In order to discuss the significance of geological ideas or perceptions from the Quran and Hadith, it is first necessary to provide some background information describing where geology is today and how it got there. Geology began as a science slightly less than 200 years ago. Although various geological perceptions date back to Aristotle over 2,000 years ago, these perceptions were never integrated into an identifiable science until James Hutton recognized the implications of the now famous angular unconformity at Siccar Point in western Scotland in 1788. The Earth's crust was deformed, and these sediments, now cemented into rock, were tilted, and a plain was developed by erosion across their upturned edges. More sediments, a minimum of 2,100 meters thick, accumulated on this plain and in the course of time were cemented to form rock. Erosion of this thick series of rocks, which is still in progress at the present time, has cut a deep canyon through these rocks, exposing the evidence of their history. This deeply eroded land surface is essentially the only land surface that human beings have ever seen. But what a magnificent history is revealed. The vastness of this history is clearly demanded by the logical implications of the angular unconformity. This evidence that the earth had a long history far beyond the memory of man was the basis for the science of geology. In the 2 centuries since Hutton saw and understood his angular unconformity in Scotland, geologists have been busy unraveling this history. The unraveling was helped by several additional fundamental but simple ideas. First, shells, bones, and plant remains found in rocks were recognized as records of life of the past. By the early 1800s, it was further recognized that the record of life in the rocks was different than it is today, and that the further back in time one went, that is, in lower and lower layers in the sequences of layered rocks, the more different the fossil record became. Thus, an empirical succession of geological ages was established. Each age was characterized by different assemblages of fossils found in the rocks. What do the Quran and Hadith say about all of this? Some key words from various parts of the Quran and Hadith have interesting implications. According to Surah 29, Ayah 20, God says, "Walk through the earth and see how God did originate creation." The story that I have just presented is the product of thousands of geologists walking through the earth, observing and thinking about their observations, primarily since the early 1800s. Next slide. Surah 79, Ayah 31, discussing creation and the earth, states, "He draweth out therefrom its moisture." Although this seems to be in a context of springs because the following phrase mentions pastures, it is permissible to consider that this refers to outgassing of volcanoes early in Earth history. Volcanic gases include large amounts of water vapor and carbon dioxide. We believe that volcanoes early in Earth's history were the sources for the oceans and the atmosphere, an understanding only reached within the last century. Next slide. Surah 79, Ayah 32 states, also in the context of creation, "And the mountains hath he firmly fixed." Similar mention of mountains is found in several other surahs. It is permissible to interpret this to imply that mountains are rooted and that modern geophysics has established deep crustal roots for the axial parts of mountain systems at converging plate boundaries. Several surahs mention geological perceptions tied to earthquakes. Next slide. Surah 86, Ayah 12, in a context of predicting happenings on the Day of Judgment, states, "And by the earth, which has faults." And Surah 67, Ayah 16, next slide, in a context of punishment for unbelievers, states, "Are you sure that God will not cause you to be swallowed up by the earth when it is turbulent?" It is permissible to interpret these surahs as evidence of the awareness of great faults within the earth and of a turbulent interior, parts of the recent developments in plate tectonics. Other surahs seem to refer to changing dimensions of continents. Next slide. In a context of creation, Surah 70, Ayah 30 says, "And the earth," here in the sense of continents, "moreover hath he expanded." Next slide. Surah 13, Ayah 41, in a context referring to the power of God, states, "See they not that we gradually reduce the continents?" And in Surah 13, Ayah 3, in the context of creation, we see, "And it is he who expanded the earth and set thereon mountains standing firm and rivers." The concept of change in the geographic dimensions of the continents is a very modern concept. Perhaps the most intriguing thoughts are from a hadith in Sahih Muslim, where Muhammad states as one of the signs of the coming of the Day of Judgment, next slide, that Arab areas will return to being fertile and green and with rivers. The archaeological and geological evidence that they once were green and will become green again is less than a century old. I have been asked, could Muhammad personally have known these things? The answer of a cautious scientist is, it is not impossible, but it would require a very sophisticated awareness of natural history. The Middle East has been and still is one of the more earthquake-prone parts of the world. Oral tradition may have mentioned fractures opening during earthquakes, and certainly the earth trembles as if its interior were turbulent on such occasions. In summary, the Islamic texts can be divided into three categories related to the past, the present, and the future. References to the past are expanding and shrinking of the earth, fixing of the mountains, deriving moisture from the earth's interior, and description of the past climate of the Arabian Peninsula. References to the present are the presence of great faults, a turbulent earth interior, and changing dimensions of the continents. References to the future are predictions about the return of better climatic conditions to the Arabian Peninsula. What is the significance of these statements made 1,400 years ago, long before the beginning of the new science of geology? We need research into the history of early Middle Eastern oral traditions to know whether, in fact, such historical events have been reported. If there is no such record, it strengthens the belief that God transmitted through Muhammad bits of his knowledge that we have only discovered for ourselves in recent times. We look forward to a continuing dialogue on the topic of science and the Quran in the context of geology. Thank you very much.
The Quran on Embryology. Dr. T.V.N. Persaud. Dr. T.V.N. Persaud is Professor of Anatomy, Professor of Pediatrics and Child Health, and Professor of Obstetrics, Gynecology, and Reproductive Sciences at the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. There he was the chairman of the Department of Anatomy for 16 years. He is well known in his field. He is the author or editor of 22 textbooks and has published over 180 scientific papers. In 1991, he received the most distinguished award presented in the field of anatomy in Canada, the JCB Grant Award from the Canadian Association of Anatomists. Dr. Persaud is the penultimate speaker that you are about to hear, saying what he has to say about how science is in total conformity with what was revealed in the Quran 1430 years ago to a man who was illiterate and lived at a time when it was impossible for him to know anything of the complexities of what you have so far heard. Dr. Persaud will be discussing issues pertaining to ladies and how the Quran succinctly and correctly stated scientific facts impossible for anyone to have known at that time. He further states facts and figures pertaining to the current sexual promiscuity and the health-related problems due to this. What is amazing is how this was clearly stated by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, long before any of these facts were known to the medical world. Let's now listen to what Dr. T.V.N. Persaud has to say on these amazing issues.
The growth of the fetus progresses rapidly until the beginning of the 12th week, after which it enters a new phase of rapid growth and dramatic changes. The rapid growth and dramatic changes which occur after the bones have been clothed by muscles have been mentioned in the Holy Quran 1400 years ago. And this is the Surah Al-Mu'minun, Ayah 14. The first slide is a scanning electron micrograph of an embryo that is just 5 weeks old. The embryo, as you will see, is curled. It is no more than a half an inch in length, and the upper part forms 2/3 of the entire body. There is a limb bud there, and there is in fact a tail. The heart is in its very primitive stage, but it's in fact beating rhythmically. And this is a special technique which is used for clearing the embryo so that it becomes transparent, and then a stain is used to stain the bony parts which have appeared, and this is what you're seeing here. It comprises mostly of cartilage, which gives form to the body of the embryo and confers upon it unquestionably human characteristics. This stage of a 7-week-old fetus, its own unique personality perhaps as a thinking, conscious, and feeling being. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be unto him, mentioned all these events I've described and their time in the hadith. And we don't have a transparency, but I'll read it for you. When 42 nights have passed over the sperm drop, Allah sends an angel to it, who shapes it and makes it ears, eyes, skin, flesh, and bones. Then he says, "O Lord, is it male or female?" And your Lord decides what he wishes, and the angel records it. Thank you. Now there is another concept mentioned in the Quran, and that is regarding the soul. There are many thoughts about the soul, but we know very little of its exact nature. And the Quran has indeed cited this. And this I shall read to you now. They ask thee concerning the spirit of inspiration, shukran. Say, the spirit cometh by command of my Lord. Of knowledge, it is only a little that is communicated to you, O man. Thank you very much. I present in this room here, to this audience, a talk I've given earlier this morning, and undoubtedly it's because of the interest of this subject. It is of wide interest, not only to Muslims, but I would say to people of all races and people in all countries of the world. And in fact, it's the first time in my life I have given the same paper twice at any conference, and so I feel very especially honored. And it deals with the Quranic rules regarding sexuality, the most intimate of relationship between two individuals, marital or sexual relations, and what the Quran says about certain aspects of the relationships between man and woman. And there are 2 or 3 areas I will touch upon. And the first we will talk about deals with the menstrual cycle. Apart from the aesthetic and hygienic aspects of having sexual intercourse during a woman's menstrual period, there is potential harm for both partners. Regarding the menstrual flow itself, the following statement, taken from the 16th edition, which is 1980, of the standard well-known Williams Obstetrics, should be noted. And concerning these problems, the Quran states, in Surah Al-Baqarah, ayah 222, they ask thee concerning women's courses. Say, they are a harm and a pollution, so keep away from women in their courses and do not approach them until they are clean. Sexual promiscuity, another area I like to briefly touch on, has long been associated with several venereal infections, in particular syphilis and gonorrhea. The risk of sexually acquired infection increases significantly with exposure to multiple sexual partners. Of great concern is the alarming increase in the incidence of diagnosed genital herpes because of sexual permissiveness. According to the United States Department of Health and Human Studies, which maintain very, very reliable statistics, maybe as many as 20 million individuals have genital herpes, and about 300,000 cases are expected annually. And each year, between 20,000 and 50,000 new cases of genital herpes are reported in Canada, where very reliable statistics are kept. In 1982, there were over 6,000 cases of herpes virus infections reported alone in Canada. More than 40% of these infections were sexually transmitted and largely involved young adults between the ages of 15 and 19 years. And for many other countries, not only the United States and Canada, it's simply because I have these statistics available and I can depend and rely on them, but the statistics are the same, and the prevalence of genital herpes infection makes the disease a virtual epidemic. Among sexually transmitted diseases, it is second only to gonorrhea. The highest incidence of genital herpes occurs among prostitutes, sexually promiscuous young adults, and sexual partners who previously have had herpes infection. In general, this age group is at the highest risk of acquiring sexually transmitted diseases. Within the last 3 years, there has been an increasing number of reports on acquired immune deficiency syndrome, which you all know as AIDS, a disease of emerging epidemic proportion. It is attracting an extraordinary amount of attention. Some of you may know that it was featured in the August issue of Time magazine. Interest and concern on account of its unknown etiology and poor prognosis. There is no known cure for this illness too, which makes previously healthy adults become immunodeficient, and in most cases the victims will die. It is particularly prevalent among male homosexuals, but epidemiological trends indicate that it is slowly increasing among heterosexuals and will gradually spread to the general population. In fact, this has been predicted by just about every agency studying AIDS, that